On the first part of our Investing Through the Ages mini-series, we talked about saving and investing during your prime earning years, roughly from your mid-20s to mid-50s. This episode, we're exploring how to approach the next phase, investing from your 50s until well into retirement. And it's something that's not as simple as it used to be.
Right. It's a really important topic. The fact that people are living longer impacts on both their financial wellness and their personal well-being.
That's our guest today, Erin Griffiths. She's the Executive Vice President of Scotiabank Global Wealth Solutions. Only a few generations ago, retirement would typically last 10, maybe 15 years. These days, with life expectancy increasing,
what we're finding is people could actually live longer in retirement than they do working.
Throw recent economic uncertainty on top of that, and suddenly managing investments during this phase of life can be especially daunting for people. But it can be done.
From a financial wellness perspective, they need to make sure that they can keep their money, make it last for as long as they live. And there are choices that can be made along the way to help them do that.
So Erin's here to give us the know-how to help make those right choices. Because whether you're currently retired, soon to be, or can only dream of that day, having enough money for those golden years is something we all need to eventually think about. So she'll give us tips on how to financially age gracefully in the face of recent volatility, how to best shift from saving to actually generating income from your assets, address some common misconceptions about this phase, and much more. I'm Stephen Maurice, and this is Perspectives. Erin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so on the first installment of this mini-series that we've been doing about investing through the ages, as we're calling it, we talked about how to approach saving and investing during what we call the accumulation stage. So from your mid-20s to mid-50s, say, roughly speaking. Tell me about the next phase from an investment standpoint. What comes after the accumulation stage?
Well, when you finished accumulating or, reaching that point where you finished accumulating, you want to start to think about the decumulation stage and all the pieces that can go into that. I think there sometimes might be a view of people that it's too late for them to start thinking about that. And I would say it's never too late to have a plan and to think through it. And the more you do have a plan, the better you're going to be able to navigate what lies ahead. There are things you need to think about from a financial perspective, what your asset allocation should be, the types of expenses you're going to have, the type of lifestyle you want to live. Mm-hmm. Family can tie into that as well, family obligations. So really thinking through and taking the time to focus on what is going to be your reality as you finish working and are ready to shift to a decumulation stage. There's a lot of factors that come into play that you really need to think through.
Okay. So decumulation means basically you're not saving anymore. You're starting to just spend it.
You need to generate income from the assets that you've saved. You might have a pension. You might have your CPP.
Right.
When you retire, there are different income sources you have. So what sequencing are you going to take those in? What are the investments you're going to have to help you manage the cash flow that you're going to need? And it's important, especially in, I'd say, relationships where it's a couple, that everybody's on the same page and doing it more at the family level as well.
Right. So there's some personal stuff in there and relationship stuff in addition to the financial stuff. So essentially what you're saying is, you need to think about the different potential sources of income that you might have. Budgeting, I guess, becomes all the more important at that point. And then figuring out where you're going to take the money from. Really, I guess you have to plan it out over a long horizon of time.
Yeah. What are the things you're going to want to do when you retire? Whether it's travel, whether you still have some other financial obligations. You might have mortgage, your living expenses, your rent, cost of care. There's a whole host of things you can go through, a checklist of items to really help you think through what you're going to need. And then always also thinking through what could be the unexpected.
Yeah, we talked about having sort of an emergency fund when you're younger, but I guess that continues to exist.
That's right.
Later on, you have to plan for that as well. From an investment or savings point of view, do people start to think about that, or should they start to think about that as they get to that decumulation stage, whether it comes to the types of things that they might invest in, how they would divide up their assets into different types of investment vehicles?
Yeah, so there's different types of asset classes that can generate different types of income. So you could have dividend income from dividend paying stocks. You could have interest from bonds. So the asset allocation piece becomes important. In order to figure out what your asset allocation is, working with an advisor can be tremendously beneficial because that will help you determine your asset allocation you need as you're accumulating, but also how that asset allocation needs to shift as you're decumulating. Most people would have a higher shift to the income generating types of investments as they retire because they need to replace the income that they're earning in their jobs now with the investment income that they've retained in combination with, say, their CPP and maybe they have some sort of pension as well that they're drawing on.
Right. So things that they can depend on
right.
in a way that maybe they can't so much if they're investing in equities, which maybe tend to be a little bit more volatile. So your mix might switch more to those income generating assets that you talked about as you get older.
Right. And then other people as well, if, depending on what their living situation is, they might have a house that they want to downsize. They're going to move to a smaller house, so they will free up some additional capital by selling their primary residence and then buying something that's smaller that might be better as you age. Depending on the circumstance, there could be, in some cases, family cottages and thinking through how you're going to deal with that asset. So those are all things. You're not just looking at the investment portfolio, but your overall set of assets.
Okay. And how does longevity figure into that? People live longer now than they used to. I mean, even back when Canada Pension Plan was starting in the mid-60s, you'd start collecting your CPP at 65. But the average life expectancy at that point was like 71 years old or something. Maybe different for men and women, but somewhere around there. So maybe a person would only expect to be living 5 or 10 more years after they've retired. So you'd make plans on that basis. Now you might live, 25, 30 years after you've retired? How does that affect the way you think about those things?
Yeah, it's a really important topic. I mean, I think because of advances in health and science, people are living longer, but they're not necessarily living well. And by that, I mean, if you look at the Canadian population, we did quite a bit of research in wealth management on this whole topic of longevity. And by the year 2040, 1 in 4 Canadians will be over the age of 65. 66% of Canadians currently over the age of 65 have multiple chronic conditions. And we all know that there's also challenges with overall capacity within the health sector that obviously everybody's working through. But what we're finding is people could actually live longer in retirement than they do working. At the same time, Rebecca Young, who's in our economics department at Scotia, did a great white paper for us. It's coming up on 2 years ago on the cost of care in Canada and how Canadians are significantly underestimating the cost of care as they age, particularly if they want to age in place. And by that, I mean they want to stay in their home. So if there is something wrong with them and they have mobility issues or they've got other chronic conditions, they still want to be able to be in their home. So they might require a personal support worker or a nurse or something to come in. The cost of that can be very expensive. And so that's going to create both implications for how you manage your financial side of things, but also how you manage your personal side of things. We've done a lot of work around how we can help clients navigate so they can maintain, call it financial wellness as they age, but also their personal well-being as they age.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to that in a sec. I just wanted to focus in a little bit more on the longevity issue. Maybe break it down into two things, because there's that care issue that probably a lot of people don't even think about that much, about the likelihood even that they're going to need to pay for additional care.
Right.
But even if somebody was healthy, I mean, just the mere fact that you could live for 30 years after you've stopped earning a regular income, that must change the way you have to think about how you make your money last for that period of time.
That's right. So it could change, for example, when you start to decumulate. So when you do your financial plan, you usually put in an expected age that you expect to live until. And usually you should do different scenarios just so you can understand the implications and the choices you might need to make down the road. Right. So if a client does a financial plan, for example, and they put their average expectancy at 85 versus 95, there will be different things you need to do to meet the goals that you've set yourself or the cash flow you think you're going to need, depending what scenario you're using.
For sure. I mean, living 10 years longer would be a big difference.
And you've got inflation and all these other things to factor into it as well.
Right. So regardless of health, even if you're the most healthy person in the world, you have to think about the fact that you might live that much longer. And then there's the whole potential care aspect that you talked about.
Yep.
Okay. You talk to a lot of advisors and people on the front lines of this. Are there any sort of misconceptions that you hear frequently or things that people often misunderstand about getting to that stage of life and how to manage the money at that point?
I think the main thing would be it's not too late to start. So some people maybe just didn't do a plan and maybe they're now in their 50s. You can still do a plan in your 50s. You can still do a plan when you're in your 60s. It's important to take an inventory of what you have and then working with an advisor or a financial planner to help you figure out your roadmap as you go forward so that you can live the life, hopefully, that you want to live in terms of both the personal choices you make and then obviously the health piece can come in later on.
All right. And I guess there's tax implications, stuff like that you need to be at least taking into account as well. Is that part of it?
Yeah, the tax piece is definitely an important part of it. So you've got the asset allocation. How are you generating income? Capital gains, dividend income versus interest income all have different tax treatments. So through the plan, you can look at your income that you might be getting from a pension or other sources, and then what you can get from your investment income and how you can make that as tax efficient as possible so that your hard-earned money works longer for you.
Okay. We've seen an awful lot of volatility over the last little while, over the last few months, I'd say. That is not likely to change anytime soon, I don't think. How should people at that stage of life be thinking about it? It must be quite frightening if you're about to retire or you've recently retired, you've got a fixed amount of retirement savings, your investments or whatever, and you see this volatility taking place. How do you advise people to think about that? I mean, do you first say stay away from your phone and don't be looking at it every day?
Well, I mean, the headlines can make it quite daunting, I think, for many investors, regardless of their age. The most important thing is to stay focused on the plan and understanding, if you look at the long term on investments, we've had different market cycles throughout time, whether it was, the financial crisis, whether it was the pandemic. And over time, we know that certain asset classes outperform. So making long-term decisions based on short-term headlines can impact your overall ability to meet the goals that you've set for yourself. And that's where the financial advice piece becomes very important for investors, to just walk through different scenarios with you. And certainly for people voter, they've lived through this before. So hopefully they can, see that, yes, stocks dropped during the pandemic, stocks dropped during the financial crisis, but they've always come back.
Right.
Nobody can predict exactly when that's going to happen. But if you have the ability to stay invested for the longer term and continue to stick to your plan, and you might need to make some adjustments in the shorter term, but working with an advisor to do that is very important.
Okay. Keep calm and carry on sort of thing.
Keep calm and carry on.
You shouldn't make long-term decisions based on short-term headlines.
Right. There's lots of headlines out there and no shortage of places that you can get them and many different viewpoints. So where does a client look for the information that they can trust and really stay focused on the long term? And that's where the advice can help, because advisors have been through multiple market cycles. They understand how asset allocation works to help you get to where you need to be. So having a trusted source to help you navigate all the noise so you can stay focused on the long term and make the right decisions and not short-term decisions that could potentially make you earn less than you would have if you just stayed invested throughout this choppy period, the same way we've seen that in the pandemic or back in the financial crisis where equities did come back. The best person to help you stay the course is a trusted advisor, because they have that degree of experience that they can tune out all those headlines, stay focused on the information that matters, and help you come up with a plan that's going to help you get to where you need to be. Okay,
you mentioned a plan a few times, and that also came up in the first episode of this series. As you mentioned, it's never too late to start a plan. What does that look like if you're, say, 55 and you don't have one? Maybe you've been saving randomly where you can, but you don't have a solid plan in place. Where should you start?
Yeah, so I can use myself as an example. I just went through doing a new financial plan with my advisor. My husband and I went through the process together. We looked at how much we think we're going to spend on all the different categories when we retire with our advisor to come up with, this is how much income we think we're going to need to generate in retirement. And then we looked at how much we would get from pensions versus CPP versus from our investment portfolios versus the equity that we have in our house. And then see if we need to make any adjustments based on the asset allocation that our advisor had set for us. We also identified where we had gaps. For example, insurance. We didn't have enough insurance, life insurance, for example, for my son. So we've made some adjustments there. So, again, it goes back to as you age, your life generally becomes more complex. You have a family, you have a house, you have more investments. Life becomes more complicated. The best way to deal with complexity is to have a plan. Right. And then it becomes revisiting it regularly. But again, it's never too late to start.
So it's almost sort of reverse engineering from what you think you'll need and then weighing that against the assets that you have.
That's right. So you might say, I need this much income a month based on what I want to do. And maybe that's realistic and maybe it isn't. But then you need to understand where you might need to make some trade-offs. Whether, okay, I can't travel as much as I wanted to, or I might need to downsize my home sooner. Or maybe I can't afford to, which is currently a hot topic. A lot of retirees are giving their children money to buy their house, especially in expensive markets like Toronto and Vancouver. And so working with an advisor to really determine what are the longer term implications of that are important.
Right. Whether you really even can afford to do it or not.
Right.
I guess. Yeah. You talked a little bit earlier about sort of the personal versus the financial component of planning for that stage of your life. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so from a financial perspective, as you age and assuming you're going to live longer, as I said earlier, you might need to think about your asset allocation a little bit differently and when you're going to start to decumulate. You also want to think about, from a financial perspective, ensuring that you have a proper will and a power of attorney in place, both for financial and for health, so that if you are not able to make decisions about your finances as you age, somebody can come in and make those for you, somebody you've chosen. And at the same time, that's obviously a person you trust, but they also understand what your wishes are. It's one thing to have a power of attorney. That power of attorney should also know what your wishes are as you age, in the event you're not able to make those choices yourself. The other piece that I would say from a personal perspective, so there's obviously the whole piece around the finances, but from a personal perspective, you might have been, for example, you've been in a profession, you've owned a business. It's a key part of your identity. Now, what's your identity as you retire? Who are you if you're no longer the doctor or the lawyer or a business owner or whatever you might have done for your career? People struggle with, what is my sense of identity? What is your sense of community? We've done some seminars through the Scotiabank Women Initiative, particularly for women clients who tend to live longer than their spouses. What is their sense of community when their spouse dies? They could outlive their spouse by a number of years. And then if all their friends are the same age too, those friends maybe aren't doing so well health-wise. So Dr. Amy Dupree, who's one of the consultants that we've worked with on this whole concept of longevity, talks about you should have friends who are 10 years younger than you, so that as you age, your community is not just people your age, but you also have this broader community that you're working with. So community and identity both become very important pieces of the puzzle. And then just educating yourself on, how you can build a new sense of identity and a new community as you retire. What are your choices? Or as family issues come up, what are the tools and resources we can provide to support you in navigating some of these unexpected life events that happen as you age?
Right. Maybe starting to think about those things when you're 65, it's harder.
Sure.
Maybe find a new community or take up a new hobby. Like you need to plan for that stuff too.
I mean, I think it's a great idea to find out, what are the options that are available to you. We have a lot of content on our Scotia Wealth Management site on different areas of interest that people might want to get involved in, new hobbies, things like that people might want to take up as they retire. Some clients want to volunteer on a board, what's involved in being a board member. So there are many different things you can do, but I've seen with, my dad is 82, turning 83 in August, and he has really struggled over the last few years in terms of keeping busy, not sitting home and watching the news. He got a dog. So there's different things that people do to keep themselves busy, but really finding that what is going to drive your passion once your career is done, for those who've really been invested in their careers, is an important thing to think through.
And you mentioned specifically having some seminars with the Scotiabank Women Initiative. I think the gap has narrowed a little bit, but often women in general are still outliving men. What sort of stories have you heard around women facing challenges in wealth management when they end up on their own.
There's industry research that shows 60 to 70% of women switch advisors within the first year of their husband dying because they didn't really have a relationship with the advisor, or the types of things they talked to their advisor about didn't really resonate with them. So we've done, through the Scotiabank Women Initiative, a series of events on various transitions that women go through from earlier career to later in the career, whether it's navigating divorce, caregiving. A lot of people are caregiving for children, but also caregiving for older parents. So that has been a good way to really help women think through how they can maintain their financial independence and also feel like they are living the fulfilling life that they want to live for themselves.
Right. And you mentioned a moment ago about older parents lending money to their kids to buy a house or whatever. What about that whole aspect of intergenerational wealth transfer? We've heard it described as a coming tsunami of wealth moving from older to younger generations. Is that part of the planning? Like, how should people be thinking about that? Is it something that you're running into in your work?
Yeah, so the intergenerational wealth transfer is coming. I think a lot of people want to make sure that their children are prepared for that. So how do we educate the next generation in terms of the responsibility that comes with inheriting money? How do we make sure that our children appreciate the cost of things? I have a 17-year-old son. What would happen if something happened to us? How he would navigate that money, who could help him that he can trust. So building that trusted relationship is very important with an advisor. It is a very important topic. And then there's the implications also of the wealth transfer. In a lot of cases, especially with baby boomers, it will go to the surviving spouse first, and then it will transfer to the children.
Right, of course. And I mean, I guess they also have to consider that they do need to take care of their own needs for potentially years to come before they start transferring wealth, if they were thinking about doing it before they passed away.
That's right. And so that's why you go back again to I feel like I'm saying the word plan a lot, but that's why you go back to the plan. So you look at what are my anticipated expenses as I retire. And if you have put in, I'm going to give whatever, my daughter and son down payments or help towards a down payment of a house, that's going to have implications on how much capital you have now to generate income. So is that still affordable depending on how long you think you're going to live? And do you have the right assumptions in terms of how long you're going to live?
Right.
So you don't end up in a situation later on where now you don't have enough money because you did do that down payment. So that's where advice can really help.
Okay. We've covered an awful lot of ground. I just want to ask you a parting question. Suspect the word plan might come into your answer, but what do you want people to take away from this conversation?
Well, I've said several times, it's never too late to start. The financial plan is really at the heart of everything. Life changes and circumstances change, and the plan will change. So it's not just about doing the plan once. You need to revisit it regularly. I would suggest reviewing your plan at least once a year, or if you've had something material change in your life, you've gotten married, you've had a child, you've lost your job, you're retiring, whatever the circumstance might be, revisiting that plan regularly. But that plan really can become the North Star of what you can afford to do, what changes you might need to make now to be able to afford to do what you want to do later on. Making sure not just having a plan, but what is your will, your power of attorney, all those things, making sure your financial house is in order is really important at any age. And particularly as you get older, making sure your family understands, or whoever it is that you trust, it could be a friend, whoever you choose, really understands what your wishes are if you aren't able to make decisions for yourself anymore as you age because something has happened. A lot of complexity happens when people aren't clear what the plan is.
Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I've been speaking with Erin Griffiths. She is Executive Vice President of Scotiabank Global Wealth Solutions. The Perspectives podcast is made by me, Stephen Maurice, as well as Armina Lagaya and our producer, Andrew Norton. For a transcript of this episode, as well as other stories, insights, analysis, and thought leadership, visit our website, scotiabank.com/perspectives. We'll see you next time.